Good evening, everyone. I believe we're now online, and we already have a few viewers, and I believe a few more will join us in the next couple of minutes. We have Duncan with us and Kathy. Um, Duncan will be starting the webinar with a short talk on supporting local action groups. And then it will be followed by a short webinar by Kathy Orlando on Citizens Climate Lobby in Canada. Just for a quick introduction, Duncan, if you'll allow me. Duncan is an experienced climate change and carbon management professional. He helps his clients integrate the risks and opportunities associated with climate change into their strategies, products, and their operations. Duncan has a background in engineering, and he has extensive experience in financial and environmental management. I hope that covers it succinctly, Duncan. And I'll turn the microphone over to you, and I'm gonna just put on the slides.
Super, great. Thanks, Audrey, and good evening, everyone. Is there any way we can tell Audrey how many people are on the line or who they are?
Right now I see 2 viewers. I don't know who they are exactly. If the viewers want to put their names into the Q&A app, if they're using the Google Plus window, then they can write their names in there, and we'll see who they are. There you go. Just a quick note for the viewers. During the webinar, you can ask questions on the Q&A app. Please use this app to ask your questions. I know that some of you write questions in the YouTube comments section. If you do, we will check them at the end of each webinar, of each session, so at the end of Duncan's speech and then at the end of Kathy's presentation, just because we have a different technical setup tonight. So we'll be checking the questions in the Q&A app specifically during the presentations. Okay, so let's try this. And share. Okay, do you see the slides, Duncan?
I do. That's great.
I'm just gonna select the right window and we're good to go. Okay.
Great. So what I wanted to talk about tonight was this starting a local climate action group. And maybe if you want to go to the next slide, Audrey, that would be great. For some reason, we ran into some technical difficulties sharing my screen from this end, so that's why Audrey's running the presentation from Montreal, or I assume you're in Montreal. And basically, what I wanted to talk about was that, as part of the Climate Reality Project, obviously, we all go out there and make presentations to various local groups and try to get them engaged on the climate change issue and further the carbon conversation. But what I've found, particularly in the town where I now live, is that a lot of people wanted some follow-up to that in terms of, okay, well, now that we're either more worried about climate change, more engaged on climate change, what do we do? So that's how I got into this. I mean, it's certainly not my background. I'm not a community organizer. It's not what I do, or it's not what I did in the past anyway. I'm starting to do more of it now. And so that's kind of the background of why I'm doing this. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Killaloo, which is a small village where I live. And then I'm going to talk about the local action group we set up, started in January of this year. So it's still quite new. We originally called it the Killaloo Climate Circle, but now we're calling it the Valley Climate Circle, referring to the Ottawa Valley, to sort of broaden the scope of the geographic area, because we thought Killaloo was maybe a bit too restricted. So you can see the things I'll talk about there. terms of where we came from, what kind of projects we're working on, how we organize ourselves, and some of the challenges we're facing right now. And then finally, I'll kind of step back a bit from the local action group here in Killaloo and say, you know, if you wanted to do something like that yourself, what kinds of things would you have to take into account? And I guess I would encourage everyone to consider doing this. I think it's a good follow-up to some of the work we're doing with Climate Reality Project, but I also would, I guess, frame that with some caveats in terms of it takes a lot of work to do this, so don't start it unless you have the energy and enthusiasm and perseverance to follow through on it. So let's go on to the next slide there. This was sort of a headline article from The Guardian a few months back, which was talking about the local climate action plan in Copenhagen. And obviously Copenhagen is very different than Killaloo. I'll tell you a little bit more about Killaloo in the next couple of slides there. But I like the headline because it said, you know, don't get scared, get ready. I think the sort of best thing we can do to combat people's either fear or paranoia or paralysis, because it's easy to go from sort of denial to despair, is to do something. And action is much easier in a group than it is individually. So that's really the genesis of the Valley Climate Circle. So let's keep on going to the next slide. Okay, great. So this is a map of southeastern Ontario. You can see Toronto on the bottom left of the map there, and Ottawa in the far right. The place that's highlighted with A, just sort of at the southeast corner of Algonquin Park, is where Killaloo is. So it's about 2 hours northwest, mostly west of Ottawa. It's in the Ottawa Valley. It's actually on a small stream or creek, which flows into the Bonnechere River, and the Bonnechere River flows into the Ottawa River downstream from Renfrew, if anyone's familiar with the area. So it's a very small village. The population of the actual village itself is about 700 people. The township is more like 2,500 people. It probably started in the 1800s as a logging community. Then it grew. There was a railway that went through from Ottawa, called the Ottawa, Arn Prior, and Parry Sound Railway. So that went right through Algonquin Park and was basically a railway mostly to remove logs and send them out to the, you know, for naval purposes or whatever the logs were used for. Then in the 20th century, the sort of railway started to decline, so Killaloo certainly declined. It was a bit of had a bit of a renaissance in the 70s. It was kind of the epicenter of the Back to the Land movement in Ontario, and there were lots of hippies and draft dodgers and people like that moved to Killaloo. So there's a really good mix of people there now. You can go to the next slide. That's great, Audrey. Of, you know, rural people that have lived here their whole life and been here for many generations. There's lots of immigrants here, Polish, German, and Irish are the three main groups. And there's also the sort of hippies. So I just took this screenshot of a play that got put on last summer called There's Hippies Up the Line by one of the local theater groups. And you can see there the sort of conflict, I guess, between the locals and the hippies. There were several active communes here in the 70s and 80s. There's still one active one called Morning Glory, which is, I don't know how many people live there. It could be up to 100, I think, at times, but it definitely fluctuates. But, you know, they've definitely figured out how to make a living off the land. So it's quite interesting from that point of view. So, you know, it's not a typical city. I mean, I spent most of my life living in cities. I lived in Ottawa for over 20 years, so very different living in a place like this. So this is just a screenshot of the presentation I made in Killaloo. It was one of several that we made last fall. We had a really good turnout, probably 45 people, which in a village of 700 people is a pretty good turnout. The local media covered it, so you can see there myself making a presentation in the upper right-hand side, and a woman named Emily Conger she's the head of the Algonquin to Adirondacks Initiative, if anyone has heard of that, which is sort of a trying to join islands of wildlife or wild wilderness in the Algonquin Park to the Adirondack Park corridor. It's modeled after the Yukon to Yellowstone initiative in Western North America. So that was the presentation that kind of led to people saying, well, before and after the presentation, what are we going to do? So enough people engaged in that conversation, so we said, well, let's have a meeting, and that led to our initial meeting of what we called the Killaloo Climate Circle. So if you want to go to the next slide, I think we can talk about that a little bit. So what we did is we had a meeting. I think the presentation I made in Killaloo was the end of November, towards the end of November. So we decided to delay the Christmas season and have our first meeting of the local climate group in January, which we did. And this is the agenda we came up with. I think we had about 18 people came to this meeting. We didn't get through this whole agenda, but I just thought I'd show you there what we tried to do. We basically got through the first 3 items there, the meeting goals, what people thought of as their vision for the group, and identifying what we could actually do. So that was the first meeting. The second meeting, what we did is we went through all those potential actions. I think people identified maybe 40, 45 different actions, and we categorized them into different groups. We just sort of said, it's just one similar to this other one or different, and we came up with about 4 groups of actions, which I'll return to later on. So you can see in these next couple of pictures, there's the people at the meeting. Like I said, I think there was about 18 or so. It's a mix of different people, although definitely more older than younger. You can see the sort of demographics of these people here. Not a lot of people employed at sort of quote unquote conventional jobs where they're working for someone else. They're either working for themselves or doing some kind of other work. So let's just keep on going here. I just want to give you an idea of the kinds of people that came to some of our initial meetings. And just looking at it from a demographic point of view, I think there's more people actually that live out in the country and rural sort of situations rather than actually in the village of Killaloo. I'm not sure if it might be 1/3, 2/3, or 60-40. Like I said before, it's an older group. I'm in my mid-50s, and I'm not the youngest person in the group. There's a few people in their 30s, but I would say most people are either my age or older. It's close to balance between men and women. I would say the level of education is probably higher than the local average here in Renfrew County, and more self-employed or retired than working for someone else, as I mentioned before. So let's keep on going. As I said, after the first couple of meetings, we sort of divided our projects or actions we wanted to do into 4 categories. In this next slide, oh, actually, I'm skipping ahead. So there's a couple of slides here just talking about the first meeting outcomes and visions, and I'm not going to go into those in any level of detail, but just so you know, I was actually very pleasantly surprised at the amount of energy and enthusiasm there was from people to sort of continue with this conversation and do something with it. A lot of people mentioned that they've been feeling isolated and afraid, worried about climate change, and even the fact they now knew other people in the community that were also concerned really helped them feel, not as isolated, and they know they had someone to talk to and someone they could actually plan actions with to do something. So this list on the right is sort of a laundry list of people's ideas around the vision. And if we go to the next slide, it sort of has another list of all the different projects that people came up with. Well, never going to do all of these, but I just thought I'd sort of share them with you. They sort of fall into 4 main categories, which we can see on the next slide, but we'll just stay on this slide for a second. Some of them are kind of on-the-ground projects, actually building something and doing something to improve energy efficiency or deploy renewable energy, something along those lines. Some of them are more around communications and outreach to get our message out and get our story out into the community. Some of them are more like liaison and coordinating with other groups that are doing things, because we didn't want to We wanted to make sure that we weren't just sort of a isolated group, because there's lots of activities going on in the community already, and we wanted to add a climate change angle to those activities. And then the last category, or it doesn't really matter how you order them, but the one I haven't talked about yet is more on the political side, which actually turned out to be quite an interesting conversation. Originally, I think we called it political action or whatever, and some people got quite involved in that and wanted to actually come up with a slate of candidates for the municipal election, which is happening this fall in Ontario, and really wanted to try to inject a climate and green agenda onto the municipal election. That became fairly controversial, and some people said, I didn't join this group to sort of become partisan and downgrade some candidates and upgrade other ones. So what we decided, it was a fairly long conversation, and I'll oversimplify now, but we basically decided that we were going to be political but not partisan, was how we summarized it. And what we meant there is we won't shy away from political issues, but we won't necessarily endorse one candidate or whatever the opposite of endorse is. De-endorse, I'm sure that's not a word, but hopefully I understand what I mean. Another candidate. So we talked about, we haven't done this yet, but what I think we'll do is either ask a series of questions to all the candidates and publish their answers if they're willing to do that, or even host an all candidates meeting, or intervene in some all candidates meetings for the local municipal council to sort of make sure that the issues we think are important from a local point of view related to climate change, mitigation, or adaptation are actually on the agenda and are talked about at election time. So let's go on to the next slide there, which basically just summarizes what I just said there in terms of so we have kind of, I guess, we have our plenary group, which is everyone that's involved in it, and typically we meet once a month for that. We've been running, maybe 12 to 15 people are coming to those meetings. And then we have 4 working groups, which you can see right there, one around on-the-ground projects, one around outreach and communication, the political one is morphed into one we call working with local government, more of a collaborative way. And then the final one here is collaborations and partnerships, which is working with other groups that are already doing something. Let's keep on going here. I'll keep my eye on the time because I realize I don't have an infinite amount of time. So the kinds of projects that we proposed so far, we actually did complete one application for funding. I mean, we don't have any funding right now. It's all totally run by volunteers. The last time we checked, this is probably not totally accurate, but I think we probably put in about 500 volunteer hours between now and January. So, it's definitely some substantial number of hours that people have put in, going to meetings, writing the grant, organizing some activities, and I'll share some of those with you, or the main public one that we've done so far. But these ones are ones we proposed in a grant application that we filed a couple of months ago. We didn't actually get the money, but it was a good exercise to go through that because it forced us to sort of ask ourselves some questions about what we really stood for and what we wanted to do. So hands-on workshops, that would be helping people to make their house more energy efficient or understand the carbon footprint and calculate it and improve it. Some film and speaker presentation series, which are just what it says, let's watch a film or have a speaker together and then talk about it afterwards. This next project is actually, we're doing it, we're putting in place a monarch butterfly garden demonstration project in the local municipal park. So it's not necessarily what you might think of as directly a climate change action, but there is definitely a climate change angle to it in terms of changing habitat and changing availability of food. That's really affected monarch butterflies. There's other things affecting it as well, but obviously we're not everyone in the climate circle is only concerned about climate change. Integration of climate awareness and action into community activities and gatherings. One thing we're doing there is there's an Irish gathering in Killu every summer, which is a big week-long celebration with lots of different activities, and it really mixes up people in terms of not just the sort of alternative crowd, but the more traditionalists or family values people are there. So we have a youth theater group that's putting on a performance. It's probably half an hour or less, and they're doing something with some people from the climate circle who are also have theater background and drama background. They've done this before, and they're doing something which has a climate change angle to it. I don't know what it's actually how it's going to turn out, and I'm not actually sure if anyone knows at this point, but that'll be happening later on. And then the last thing is Earth Day celebration. There hasn't been an Earth Day celebration in Killaloe for probably 20 years or so. They used to do it back in the 70s and 80s, but we thought we would actually do one, and we did. It turned out to be, we had it not on Earth Day, which was a Tuesday, I believe, and the weekend before was Easter, so we did it on the weekend after Easter on a Saturday. So if you want to go to the next couple of slides, Audrey, that would be great. We had it in Station Park, and it was actually, I mean, it was a really cold day. It wasn't sunny and warm, so as you can see just by the way people are dressed, there was actually 3 media articles in the local media, in the Barry's Bay paper, the Eganville paper, and the Pembroke. Those are the 3 closest newspapers to Killaloe. We don't have our own one there. But we did get media coverage. We've got some people that are involved in other NGOs, so they have a media list. We sent out a press release beforehand. We had a great turnout. We probably had 10 different groups actually involved in this Earth Day celebration, either with a booth or an activity. Some of them were related to climate change, and they all had a green kind of angle to it. We decided not to. There was no vendors, so we weren't selling anything because we wanted to celebrate Earth Day. And we also had an open stage, which you can see there on the left. So there was music or spoken word or poetry or something going on from around 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. It would have been probably a bigger turnout if we had better weather, but we probably had at least 100 people went through the park and spent some time at our Earth Day celebration, which everyone afterwards was pretty happy that the whole thing seemed to go off quite smoothly, and it was something we could actually say we did this, and it's a small sort of celebration. The Earth Ball you see there was probably the most popular thing. It was a giant Earth Ball, sort of 4 foot, basically a big beach ball with a map of the Earth printed on it from a NASA imagery or from NASA imagery. So that was really popular with the kids. Unfortunately, it did actually not survive the day because it got sort of abused by lots of kids, but it certainly was a focus of attention and got the kids to do something. The other, let's keep on, there's another photo, another couple, at least one more photo on this slide, so let's go to that one. There's a local arts group called the Ottawa Creative Arts Open Studio, which is just started up here in the last year or two, and they did a workshop making prayer flags, and you can see that in the upper right-hand side there. So that was an activity that people could get involved in, and there was tradition of sort of making and hanging these earth flags in very ancient times. So that was something that people seemed to enjoy actually doing something, and you can see some examples of local musicians. The guy playing the flute, or maybe not a flute, I'm not sure. Well, it's a flute, but it's not a traditional flute. There's a local, he's a famous local guy. He's sort of one of the original hippies that started up Morning Glory Farm. So he's kind of a fixture in the area, and it was great to sort of see him out and involved. And it's really been a great, or this certainly a public event like that was great in terms of bringing people together. So I'm going to just wrap up now with challenges and next steps, and I've kind of divided the challenges into 3 categories. People are always obviously the most important one, projects in terms of what we're actually going to do, and then what tools and infrastructure might we need, or how can we design some tools and infrastructure that would help people stay together. So I think the biggest challenge is there's a core group, small core group of maybe half a dozen or so core volunteers that are really driving most of the action in the group. So it's important that they don't burn out and stay motivated. So we have to be aware of that, and I'm certainly one of those people, so I have to make sure I don't sort of overextend myself. We also need to engage some non-core group volunteers more. I mean, there's lots of people that are kind of around the periphery and come to meetings but end up not necessarily volunteering or doing something, so we need to figure out how to get them more engaged and doing stuff. And then also there's kind of a bigger group other sort of demographic segments that are not necessarily part of our core audience yet, but we'd like to engage with them because obviously this conversation is something that concerns everyone or should concern everyone. I think I've pretty much covered those projects in terms of what we've talked about. The networking was just an idea of networking with other groups, and we certainly have done that. And one other group that I'm involved with and actually helped to organize the original presentations that I did in Killaloe as well as Renfrew and Eganville was the Watershed River Watershed Project, which has been around for maybe 15, 20 years and is going up the only sort of environmental groups in the local area. We've started to set up some tools and infrastructure, but it's pretty low tech. I mean, most of it's just picking up the phone and talking to people or getting together and meet. We do have a sort of email list, but it's not very sophisticated at this stage. We have a Facebook group, which actually has brought in other people. I'm amazed, actually, at Facebook. I mean, there's lots of people that have joined our Facebook group that have not come to meetings, but are interested and seem to do that. And I wouldn't say there's a lot of discussion on our Facebook group, but there is some, probably activity maybe on a weekly basis. And we have actually set up a website, which I'm not sure how valuable it is, but I'm hoping that as we go forward, it'll be another way of engaging with people. So let's keep on going here, Audrey. The next slide is sort of, I thought I was going to be able to do a bit more statistics, but as I said, we've probably done about 500 volunteer hours. Typical meetings, if you could stay on that last slide, that would be great.
Coming back to it. Okay. Having a small lag here. Oh, okay.
So, typical meetings, we have probably, as I said, 12 to 15 people are coming to those meetings. And you could just go back one. Yeah, I can look at it here, I guess that would be there. Yeah, so the email list, we probably have 40 members on it or so at this point. There's like 25 to 30 people on the Facebook group. And you can see the stats here for the website, which if anyone's interested in looking at it, is valleyclimatecircle.org. It started off the end of March, so you can see that's when the most activity was. People took a look at it. Then there was more activity around Earth Day. That's why there's a bunch of stuff happening there. And then recently, there's been very little activity on the website. So we're not spending much time on that. If you go to the next slide, Audrey, you'll see the actual website. And maybe you've got that up there already because I'm not looking at it. There we go. So we just set up the website using WordPress.com. That was the easiest way of doing it, and we wanted to make it pretty, easy and relatively intuitive, and also allow more than one person to use it. So I was familiar with WordPress.com from my own blog, so I just did that. And as you can see there's a little widget showing the April concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. Above 400 parts per million for the first time on average for an entire month, which not good news. So let's wrap up with the last couple of slides here. What resources and advice would I give to you? I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on this. Like I said, we started this in January, so we're maybe 5 months into it. But it's certainly been a learning experience for me. I think it's important for the Climate Reality Project to try to support. I mean, it's great to raise people's awareness, but unless they do something, it's kind of not going to result in change. And we're all about change, so we need to make sure that we either support that in some way, or point people to other groups where they can actually do something and do something together, because clearly. This climate change is bigger than any one of us. We need to do this together, as Al Gore is fond of saying. One of the things that we find seems to work is delegate and break it into small working groups. I mean, you can't do all this together in one sort of plenary group. So by breaking up into the working groups, the 4 ones we've had, that's certainly been great in terms of offering people an opportunity to specialize in what they're most interested in, and also work with a smaller group of 4 to 6 people who can actually solve how can we organize this, what needs to get done, who's going to do it, those kind of things. Kathy gave me some good advice several months ago in terms of always giving a volunteer something to do. That's how you kind of keep them engaged, because people come to groups and want to do something, and if they don't get something to do, then often you won't see them again. And it's also, I mean, this is maybe a little bit easier to do in Killaloe just because I live in the village, I'm out walking my dogs all the time, I walk around a lot, so I do see people on a regular basis, and it's you know, definitely a very small village, and everyone knows what everyone else is doing, so it's great to sort of connect with people. And try to celebrate, even if you have a small success like the Earth Day thing, it's great to try to celebrate that. The last two items there are just some things I pointed to because when we were starting to think about doing this, I kind of thought, well, okay, well, how do you do this? Brian Eatling, or Etling, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, has started a couple along with Larry, one in St. Louis and one in Oregon, where he spends his summers, the summer parts of the 6 months. So the last slide just sort of says, you know, is this something you'd be interested in doing? And, you know, I would encourage you to consider it, but, you know, it's not without some caveats. There's a lot of work involved, but if you want to facilitate action on climate change and sort of take it to the next level, or take it, you know, towards the end of my presentation, we always talk about solutions, right? That's the typical climate reality project. I mean, I know some people don't wait till the end, but if you do want to talk about solutions, then local action is really not the only thing people need to do, but it's certainly an important component of it. And you know, most action needs to be local at some point. But you know, you need to consider: are you willing to commit to this, or do you know someone else who might be willing to do it? It doesn't have to be you, obviously. Are you a good networker? You know, is there a core group engaged? You might not start off with that core group, but you need to have a few people, you know, maybe half a dozen or other number of people involved. Otherwise, it just becomes too much for one person to do, and you're going to burn out. So I guess when I gave an earlier version of this presentation back in January, when we had was it January or no? When was that meeting in Toronto, Audrey?
I remember it was very cold and there was a snowstorm.
Okay, so it was January. I think it was January because we might have had our first meeting of the climate circle, but not the second one. And so that's I think when I had given that recommendation that a Climate Reality Project consider supporting this. Obviously, this webinar is one way of doing that, and I think at an earlier meeting with Victoria and Audrey, I had committed to putting together a small written document to kind of try to capture my experience and also maybe some other ones. So that's still on my list, Audrey, but I haven't done it yet.
No problem. Well, this webinar is definitely a good way to put it on the record and have you know, one resource for the climate leaders to refer to. The webinar is always available after the live session, so they can go back to the video to see the slides again.
Sure. And if people have questions, or you know, even just want to bounce some ideas around, I can, you know, I would certainly be willing to entertain either phone calls or emails, whatever people want to do, to you know, talk about doing something similar or something different in their own local community.
Yeah, that's great.
Like I said, I'm not an expert. You know, we're 5 months in. A year from now, we may not even exist, but we've done something, and I think people are excited and enthusiastic about it. So I feel good about that.
Well, you definitely have good advice to share. I mean, it's a very new group, but I see that you've already, you know, presented a few pieces of advice that are very important in terms of how to support volunteers and how to keep volunteers engaged, and that's probably one of the main challenges when dealing with groups of volunteers, is to make sure they're, you know, always motivated to do what they had a passion to do from day one. And so that's a great piece of advice, definitely. I don't see a question in the Q&A app right now, but if anyone has a question, now is the time to write it. I'm just going to go over to the YouTube page just in case. Okay. I do not see anything up there yet. Actually, I had one question for you, Duncan.
Sure.
Was it necessary for your group to register a non-for-profit organization, or are you doing everything just as a citizen group that is not registered?
Yeah, we don't really have any formal legal status. I mean, we're a club. We're just a group of
Okay.
people that are getting together and doing something. So, um, we haven't registered or, certainly applied for nonprofit status. Uh, I think that might become an issue further down the line. If we had received the grant, for example, that might have been an issue. So we might have had to get more organized. And I know some organizations, if you apply for money, they require you to be a nonprofit or charitable status, that kind of thing. But
Mhm.
we haven't thought too seriously about that. I mean, I know some people in the group have done that for other organizations, so we have some knowledge and experience available, but it hasn't come up yet.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Um, okay. I don't see any other questions. We have Kathy who just joined us back on the video. Kathy, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome uh, to ask them as well. I believe we don't have your microphone on right now. Oh, there it is. Fantastic. So I don't see any other questions on the Q&A app, but if anyone thinks of anything, feel free to post the questions before the end of the session, and we can address them at the end of the webinar. Kathy, I see. Do you have a question?
Yes, I noticed the list of things that your volunteers were considering to do is to lobby Parliament. Is that still what they want to do, or has that been shelved?
That was sort of one of the things that was identified in the very first meeting. And I think what that basically morphed into was the political action group. And the people that joined that group, including myself, I mean, I wasn't necessarily one of the drivers behind it, but I went along with it just to figure out what was going on. And they decided to focus on local political action as opposed to provincial or national kind of thing. So I'm just trying to remember the rationale for that. I guess they thought that it was important to focus first on municipal. There's a bit of a history, I guess, with the local council here, and that the local council has been very traditional and unwilling to entertain new ideas about anything almost. I mean, not just environmental, green, or sustainability stuff, but anything that's sort of innovative or different from an economic development point of view or other things. So there is a bit of a groundswell of people that realize that the local council has to be replaced. It's an election year for local council. We didn't know at the time, of course, that there's going to be a provincial election. So I think between that, the sort of local election coming up, the need for a new local council, as well as the recognition that it kind of starts locally and then you can build from there. Or that was the thinking of people that they thought we could have more impact at the local level.
Yes,
Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that was what people thought.
yes, I started out at the local level too, for sure. I've presented a lot to council, and when working with local councils with regards to climate change, they're going to be left on the hook for a lot of the damages that come as a result of climate change, and
Sure.
yeah, should be borne in mind moving forward. So, but
Yeah, there's going to be a huge infrastructure cost, both in terms of repairing damaged infrastructure and also upgrading infrastructure to new standards, right?
yep. So there's as well with a price on carbon. I think all municipalities, an inevitable price on carbon, all municipalities should be looking at reducing their carbon footprint now, just so they don't have to pay that extra price that's coming down the pipes.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually that's an interesting thing because I mean I've talked about pricing carbon and carbon taxes and stuff like that, and you know you definitely get a different response to that in a rural community than you would in an urban one. I mean,
I
I'm
got
sure.
laughed at in 2012. So yeah,
What's that?
I got laughed at when I mentioned that in 2012. But now the counselors are thanking me, like privately and even more publicly, for having the courage to stand in front of council and say, climate change is coming, it's real, and you better start preparing for a price on carbon. And a whole bunch of people burst out laughing like they thought I was dreaming, but it's coming. And, you know, we need to prepare our communities for this inevitable price on carbon. Got to,
Yeah.
yep. You just,
But I mean, when you're talking, like I made a presentation to a local chapter of the National Farmers Union a month or two ago, and when I mentioned carbon tax, I mean there was definitely some pushback there. And these guys are, I mean, the National Farmers Union is pretty progressive on a lot of things. They've done some amazing things on climate change, but you know, clearly positioning it as a fee and dividend like you guys are doing, or some way that's not going to kind of be regressive in terms of affecting poorer people more than rich people. We obviously need to always consider that when we're proposing these things or even mentioning them.
well, you're doing great work in Killaloo.
Thanks.
Okay, we're running out of time a little bit, but thank you, Duncan. And again, if there's any questions that come in, oh, okay, someone's trying to get into the webinar. I'll deal with that. But if anyone else has questions, feel free to write them in the Q&A app. So we will start Kathy's workshop. Kathy is going to speak about Citizens Climate Lobby in Canada. She's actually the national manager for the organization, and she was trained by Al Gore in 2008 as part of the Montreal group. She has delivered over 100 presentations. I have trouble keeping up actually with the list, Kathy. A lot of presentations all over the place. And her extensive citizen engagement earned her a Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012 and a Civic Award from the Greater City of Sudbury in 2014, I believe, last month. So over to you, Kathy.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to turn off my video because I find it distracting for me. So just turn that off. And if you could pull up my slides, that would be great. Okay, so are the slides on?
Yes,
Yep.
sorry, microphone was muted.
Okay. Wonderful. So thanks for the opportunity to talk tonight. I think I'll be about 15 minutes. I'm just waiting for my slides to come up. As Audrey said, I work as the national manager for Citizens Climate Lobby in Canada. And while I'm waiting for the slides to come up, I'll just, are the slides up? Can you hear me? Can you?
Yes, they are.
Okay,
I can
cool.
hear you, but I can hear you, but I can't see the slides.
Yeah, neither can I. There we go.
Okay. I see them.
I see them along the bottom in one of
We,
the.
we can actually see them on the YouTube viewer, and I can see them in the main screen here. Oh. Okay. Okay. They are on the YouTube viewer.
Okay, I'm just gonna, Duncan, just click on my other thing, and it'll come up on your Google Hangout. Okay, so the agenda for tonight is well, welcome to the call. I want to go over why we do this work, the purposes of Citizens Climate Lobby, the history of our organization, what we do and how we do it, and current statistics. E.B. White wrote the following: "Every morning I awake torn between a desire to save the world and an inclination to savor it. This makes it hard to plan the day. But if we forget to savor the world, what possible reason do we have for saving it? In a way, savoring must come first." So if this was a group I would actually ask everybody to turn to their partner and say, what do you want future generations to experience that is threatened by climate change? But even now, you can think about that. And the reason why we go through this exercise is because of the first two strategies for being a citizen climate lobbyist. It's important to stay connected to what you want future generations to experience. That's a very important thing to do. And thinking of something that you cherish that is possibly threatened by climate change really helps. So anytime that you lose focus and you get negative, just keep visioning what you want to be around 30, 40 years from now. And having this positive vision of the future and of human nature will give you more energy and attract the right people to you. So the purposes of Citizens Climate Lobby are to create the political will for a sustainable climate. But I think the more important one is to empower individuals to have breakthroughs in exercising their personal and political power. And I think that's more important because that's what makes the first one possible, but it is also where all the magic happens. Now I'll go on to the history of Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby was founded by Marshall Saunders. He's the man in the purpley shirt with the purpley flowers behind him. Marshall, for 25 years, had worked really hard reducing poverty through microloans. That's where you give a small loan to a community person, and then they pay back that loan, and then others can continue getting loans to start business. And for his work, he was given a Grameen Foundation Award, which is an award from the Grameen Bank of India, and he's the only non-head of state ever to win one. Marshall Saunders saw the movie An Inconvenient Truth, and unlike 99.9% of the people who saw it, he couldn't let go of it. And he went back and watched it a few more times, and he ultimately called Al Gore and was trained by Mr. Gore, one of the first people that were trained. And after giving a few presentations, I think it was about the 60 mark, he came home one day and had read that Congress had given yet another $1 billion to oil companies. And he realized that asking people to change light bulbs and change their cars and change their eating habits was going to have very little impact if we didn't change what was happening in the halls of power. Marshall belonged to an organization for reducing poverty called Results, and that's what the middle panel is about. Sam Daly-Harris is the founder of Results, and Marshall had worked with them for 20 years, and he knew that they had a model for getting politicians to engage on important issues. So he searched for an environmental group that used this model, and he couldn't find one. So he founded Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'll get more into the details about what that's all about. Now, the picture on the right is Marshall Saunders with his wife, and this is a very unique organization. Marshall says he doesn't want to belong to any environmental group that doesn't involve dancing. So we dance a lot and tell poetry and sing a lot at Citizens Climate Lobby. We're not your usual mom and pop environmental organization. So that's pretty much the history of Citizens Climate Lobby. And briefly how it came to Canada is I met Marshall in May of 2010 in Nashville at a climate reality presentation with Mr. Gore. And he thought I was American. And he tried to recruit me to Citizens Climate Lobby. And when he did, once I sat in on the first couple phone calls, I knew this was an organization I needed to belong to. He didn't know I was from Canada, though, but he was grateful when he found out. Anyways, in September 2010, Citizens Climate Lobby started in Sudbury. By November 2010, there was a chapter in Red Lake and in Toronto. By November 2011, there were chapters in Halifax and Salt Springs, and we recovered about 10 ridings. We're developing relationships with members of parliament in about 10 ridings in November of 2011. By November of 2012, we were developing relationships with about 20 MPs with citizens living in their ridings. By November of 2013, we were over 40 ridings covered by citizens who are citizen climate lobbyists using our methodology. And we hope by November of 2014 we'll be at 80 ridings covered by citizen climate lobbyists. Just a couple people who endorse our organization include James Hansen. He actually loves our carbon fee and dividend model. And there's pictures of us socializing with him at the Washington conference last year in June of 2013. And Bill McKibben also endorses Citizens Climate Lobby. So what we do and how we do it, if I had to sum it up, it's very Gandhian in focus. My nephew likes to call it environmental jujutsu. Basically, our approach is we're going to get the politicians to do what we need them to do. This next slide is really important. I think it's the most important slide of this entire talk because it is the central axiom of Citizens Climate Lobby. Basically, we feel that politicians do not create political will, they respond to it. And this following excerpt from Charles Wright, Power and the Law, comparing power and force, sums up what we're about. Power seems to me pretty much the same thing as freedom. Power is a thing that everybody wants, the most they can possibly have of. That is, skiing is power, sex appeal is power, the ability to make yourself heard by your congressperson is power. Anything that comes out of you and goes out into the world is power. And in addition to that, the ability to be open, to appreciate, to receive love, to respond to others, to listen to music, to understand literature. All of that is power. By power, I mean human faculties exercised to the largest degree possible. So in a way, in a large sense, by power, I mean individual intelligence. Now, when you reach out to another person through the energy or creativity that is in you, and that other person responds, you are exercising power. When you make somebody else do something against their will, to me, that is not power at all. That is force. And force, to me, is a negation of power. And then we usually have an exercise where we compare force and power. But this is just an introduction. So what do citizen climate lobbyists do? Well, it's very simple. The methodology that we use is about 30 years old and was developed by Results. Generally, what group leaders do is they give about 5 to 10 hours per month to the organization. And to stay focused and effective, group leaders need to do only 4 things with the help of the international and national offices. 1, create a small group of people around you to help you with the Citizen Climate Lobby monthly actions. We send them out once a month. Develop a relationship with your member of parliament around the issue of climate change with your volunteers. Develop a relationship with your local media around the issue of climate change with your volunteers. And the added bonus is listen to and participate in the myriad of teleconference calls that we have. The weekly group leader calls and the monthly international calls are empowering. These calls are how we get to know each other so we can support each other. We're not an email-based group. We are a relationships group, and we rely heavily on the telephone and teleconference calls. I really feel the CCL diaspora and the regular and facilitated teleconference calls are the most valuable aspects of Citizens Climate Lobby, connecting with people across Canada, the United States, and the world, because we have chapters in Central America, Bangladesh, India, Sweden, England, Australia, is very magical. We're not making this stuff up. We're actually using science. There was a really good paper that came out in 2009, basically for how to influence MPs, and I'm not going to go into details, but people can go back and look at this. basically, my favorite thing is on number 1 in this slide, and is remember kissing babies. You know, building in writing support is essential for creating political will on a federal issue. And I love this quote from a member of parliament: "There are only 2 kinds of people in this world: those who can hurt you at home, and everybody else." So when motivating MPs to act, this is what MPs responded to. And basically, if you want an MP to act, the more personal, the better. So meeting with them face to face is extremely powerful. And if you notice, there's all sorts of pictures of citizen climate lobbyists meeting with their MPs all around here. Personal phone calls help. Handwritten letters or personalized emails work as well. Meeting with organizations are good. Letters to the editor are okay. Media attention are a little bit better. But notice blogs and Facebook groups and petitions are much less powerful than meetings and phone calls. This book is really guiding us now. It's called Tragedy in the Commons, and it's by Alison Lote and Michael McMillan from the Samara Group, and we're getting a lot of helpful hints out of this book as well. It was just published last month. So just to go back to the strategies for being a citizen climate lobbyist. So what we ask our volunteers to do every month is to practice laser talk so that they can become quite familiar with the various aspects of climate change. We want them to work in teams, not on their own, because it's very empowering and it's a lot of fun and it distributes the work. It's really important that you have to be a good listener. Politicians are very busy people, just like we are, and we need to give them respect and listen carefully. We're not there to go in and tell politicians we want you to support our policy. What we're trying to do is find common ground using our policy, which I will discuss in a minute, as a jumping off point. Always stay within your allotted time. Don't automatically give out resources or proof that supports your position. Wait to be asked for references. Make partnerships with unlikely groups, companies, and people. Environmentalists are not the only people concerned about what's facing humanity and the earth. And always find the grace in the political losses, because they're not losses, they're just another chapter. So the last bit I would like to talk about is what we lobby for. So what we lobby for at Citizens Climate Lobby is a carbon fee and dividend policy. And what it does is it taxes destructive consumptive habits and rewards good consumptive habits. So what carbon fee and dividend does is put an incrementally increasing fee on carbon pollution and returns 100% of the dividends to households on an equitable basis. And we have data that clearly shows the bottom 2/3 of Canadians would come out even or ahead in terms of how much carbon fees they would pay in comparison to the carbon dividend check they would receive from the government. And basically, it's quite simple. The less carbon you consume, the greater your return. So the less carbon you consume, the less carbon taxes you would pay. But because we all get the same size check, the greater your return will be. This next slide just briefly describes generally the 5 different ways to price carbon. There's the status quo. We are paying, according to a recent study from the IMF, $34 billion a year in subsidies. About $20 billion of that is unpaid carbon taxes and the damages that the climate is doing to our environment, and then there's all sorts of other taxes in that as well. So yeah, we are paying for what's happening with our climate, and we will pay more, especially if we do not get it under control. And then there's regulation and cap and trade and a carbon tax, but carbon fee and dividend is slightly different from a carbon tax in that you get that dividend check back and it's 100% revenue neutral. That means, and revenue neutral means no increase in federal tax revenues. So here's just a brief slide that describes what carbon fee and dividend is. Carbon fee and dividend is a solution. You get money back from the government, and you'll get more money back from the government than you pay in taxes, the more you reduce your carbon footprint. It's an incentive to reduce your carbon footprint. So finally, I'll end up with statistics and then how to reach us. So in 2013, our volunteers across Canada had written 95 letters to the editor, and as of mid-May 2014, they've already written 88, and more data has come in. So our media hits will probably be double of last year's by the looks of it, and I'm really proud of all the work that people are doing. We have some tremendous writers out there across Canada. Additionally, we have found a champion in the House of Commons who is championing our bill, Bruce Heyer. Bruce Heyer, for the third time, has asked during question period for the House of Commons to consider carbon fee and dividend. Most recently, he did it on May 16th, and he also brought up Tom Rand's Waking the Frog book as well. So we're really grateful to the work of MP Bruce Heyer, and we've been working with Bruce Heyer since he, along with the New Democratic Party, when he was part of their party, championed Bill C-311, the Climate Change Accountability Act. In 2013, we held our first international conference and lobbying days. It was successful. We had 36 lobbyists, lobby 26 members of parliament, and 2 aides. As well, we just had a lot of fun. So those are pictures of us. I would hope that everyone would save the date, November 22nd to 24th, because we're going back to Ottawa to lobby again, and we're going to be bigger and better, and we're going to have a lot of fun. If you want to find out more about Citizens Climate Lobby, there's 2 ways to do it. You can join an introductory call to Citizens Climate Lobby every Wednesday night, and here's the information. Or you can contact me at Kathy at citizensclimatelobby.ca, or call me at 705-929-4043, and there's the information there. And that's it. So thank you. So if there's any questions, I'm open to them. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have this call recorded and put online.
Thank you, Kathy. I don't see any questions right now on the Q&A app and on YouTube either. We have a very quiet small group tonight.
I have a question for Kathy. It's Duncan here.
Go ahead.
This is all great, Kathy. I mean, I'm totally in favor of what you guys are doing, and I wish I had more time to participate in it, and maybe I will in some future time. But my specific question is around the impact of a carbon fee and dividend on basically poor rural people. I mean, Renfrew County is one of the poorest counties in Ontario. It's very rural, so people, farmers or other rural people obviously don't have as many options to use low carbon solutions as people in the city. I mean, they can't bike to work, they can't take the bus to work. They often need to pick up trucks for their, for their business or farm. So, what can I say to people like that in Renfrew County who say, this looks like it's going to hurt me?
Well, because there's a dividend check given back to people, for those who are poor people of lesser income tend to have much lower carbon footprints to begin with. Now, rural adds that extra transportation factor to it, but so I think it would all depend on the person's carbon footprint. I think that's what it ultimately comes down to. Like, are they average or above average carbon footprint or below average carbon footprint? And we need to know the data for that for Renfrew County. It doesn't seem like nearly as remote as, like, I'm a little bit more concerned about the remote regions in Canada, like the Arctic or communities that are fly-in, because those have huge carbon footprints for their food and huge carbon footprints for seeing families. So I guess what to say to your local people is that it depends on their carbon footprint, and if they're eating local food and they're burning wood in their fireplace, but they drive a little bit more, I'm pretty confident that their carbon footprint will be fairly low, regardless, because they're lower income and they won't be paying nearly as much.
Is the data you have on that, is that publicly available or available somehow, so we could actually, I could take a look at it and see what the impact might be? Or
yeah, so basically we extracted our data from the Center for Policy Alternatives data, and they extracted their data from the BC carbon tax. So basically, if you think about it, if you have an average carbon footprint or below average carbon footprint, you're going to pay equal or less in carbon taxes than what you will get in return. And the data is about 2/3 of Canadians are equal or have lower carbon footprints than the average. The big carbon footprints come from living in big houses, driving multiple big cars, and in airplanes. If you want that data, it is available on our website, or you can email me and I can send it back to you.
okay, great. No, it just be good to have some. We could have some data to be able to respond to that question.
Well, a lot of citizen climate lobbyists, I'm finding, aren't environmental activists. A lot of them are social justice activists. And when I go through this data with them on how the carbon fee and dividend would work for people living on lower incomes, they find it quite favorable. So, and Renfrew County is really not that far from a major center like Ottawa. So it's not like you live in Red Lake or something where you're 10 hours from Winnipeg and 25 hours car drive from Toronto.
Yeah, no, but it's not the once a year trips that kill your carbon footprint. It's the daily commuting to work. Like people here drive an hour to work every day, right? And they have, they may or may not have an efficient vehicle because they tend to have older vehicles. You can't use natural gas for heating because we don't have it. So, right, a lot of people use wood, but some people are using oil, which obviously has a higher carbon footprint than natural gas. Other alternatives. So.
Yeah, they would have to calculate the carbon footprints to get a feel for how great their taxes will be. That's a good question.
Kathy, I have one additional question to Duncan's. This has been implemented in British Columbia, but is there anywhere else in the world where they are formally considering it or implementing it at the moment?
There is no jurisdiction in the world currently that has carbon fee and dividend. British Columbia has a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Just hold on a second, guys. What? I'm on a teleconference call, okay? Okay, sorry. Teenage kids just came in the house. There are many jurisdictions that are setting up carbon taxes as we speak. I don't have so there's also Norway that's had a carbon tax since about 1991. Sweden since 1990. I'm not sure if they're revenue neutral, and yeah, just hold on a second.
Okay. Okay, so I don't see any other questions online right now.
Teenagers just came in.
Okay, well that answers the question. Thank you. I don't see any other questions right now. We have still have a few viewers. they're being very quiet for the moment. So to our viewers, this would be your last chance to ask a question to either Duncan or Kathy. Well, last chance live, but you can always contact them offline if you'd like. Any other questions from Duncan?
No, I'm good, thanks.
All right. Okay. So we've reached pretty much the end of the webinar. Thank you, Kathy. And that was very, very interesting. Two topics that are pretty much, intertwined, and they have a lot in common. And I hope the climate leaders will get involved with either local action groups or CCL. I definitely recommend both options. If anyone can do both, that is great. I know they're already very busy. Kathy, did you want to say a word or two about the upcoming event in Ottawa in June? I know very soon, but... Oh, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Yeah, now you can, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, there's two things happening this month. On June 2nd and 3rd, Citizen Climate Lobbyists, I think there'll be about 15 of us, are conducting a mini blitz, a lobbying session on Parliament Hill, and we are also helping Member of Parliament Alex Adamanenko with a screening of a really good movie called The Change Agents. And so far, 13 parliamentarians have RSVP'd yes to this, and it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a movie about a young woman who's very concerned about climate change and what she does about it. It's a very empowering movie, and it was made by MP Adamanenko's local high school with the help of professionals. It's a really good movie, and I can't wait till it goes into distribution, and I highly recommend lots of climate activists screen that. And then at the end of June, Citizen Climate Lobby will be conducting a massive blitz to Congress. They're going to reach every senator and every congresswoman and man on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. So far, I know of at least 24 Canadians out of the 550 registrants so far that are going to Washington, D.C., and it should be a blast. I think Audrey's going, so you have fun, Audrey, and yeah, it's a fun organization.
Thank you, Kathy. That's great. I hope a few more climate leaders will join us. I know there's already a few Canadian climate leaders registered for Washington and for Ottawa, so I'm looking forward to that. All right. Well, thanks, both of you. And I'm looking forward to our next webinars. There won't be any webinar during the summer, but we're going to start again in the fall. The date has yet to be confirmed, but we'll let you know by email and Facebook. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. You really appreciate this.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.